Hey, friends, welcome to the first episode for this series on becoming a future ready church for the Exponential Next podcast. Too many church leaders struggle with ministry paradigms that thrived in the past, but just don't seem to work any longer for them, or at least they work less and less, or they don't make sense to the rising generation. But we want to offer you a broader picture. In light of the many cultural shifts facing us today, can you clearly define or identify your church's next step to prepare for the future? Now, throughout the series, we want to introduce you to the concepts in the book my co-authors and I have written, Becoming a Future Ready Church, which is focused on the ministry shifts we think church leaders should be thinking about to empower and encourage the next generation of leaders. We want to offer you a broader picture, one of hope, not just of hand-wringing. My name is Daniel Yang. I'm the Director of Churches Welcome at World Relief.
And I'm Warren Bird, Senior Vice President of Research at the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, ECFA, and co-author of 35 books for church leaders.
And I'm Adelle Banks, a veteran religion journalist. I'm the project's editor and a national reporter at Religion News Service.
And we are friends, and we wrote a book together released in October 2024 by Zondervan entitled Becoming a Future Ready Church, 8 Shifts to Encourage and Empower the Next Generation of Leaders.
Here's the big why behind this book, the main problems we're trying to address. What shifts should your church make so the rising generation leads with hope? Becoming a Future Ready Church analyzes major converging trends, multiple cultural awakenings, religious and demographic changes, and mental health challenges marked by anxiety, skepticism, and fragmentation.
So people wonder, how did the three of you, very different perspectives, backgrounds, context, how'd you get to write a book together? How'd that come together? And it actually started at Exponential in Orlando, where I heard a workshop led by Daniel Yang. And he was talking about all the ways that God had blessed churches in the 1950s, all the models that were working and thriving. And then he said, but actually, we're a lot closer to 2050 than the 1950. And how much are we just tweaking the models that seem to, the methods, the approaches, not the unchanging gospel, not who Jesus is or what Scripture says, but all the stuff we've used to frame it. How much closer are we to 1950 than to thinking about where the culture will be in 2050 and how to speak the unchanging gospel to that? And that began a discussion to say, well, is there something we can do to help churches make that shift? And as we talked and prayed, I thought, we really need to tell stories. I love statistics, but people don't care about 84% this or that unless they know a story and say, well, the vast majority, 80%, 84% even, of people approach it this way. I just made up that number. But the point being that when I saw Adelle Banks at a conference where she was reporting and I was speaking, I thought, this is it. And so I approached Adelle and said, Adelle, could you use your storytelling expertise to add, if we did, say, a book and a chapter for each, and you told a story of a church that's actually doing what we describe, how would that work? And that's the way the three of us came together, and Zondervan has blessed it, and we have had a wonderful time developing this book.
Yeah, and a big part of the book, and you mentioned 1950, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. A big part of the book is giving our readers and giving you an imagination for what it feels like to actually try to expect the next generation to lead a church, a model paradigm, a ministry paradigm, a model that it was birthed in a particular era, but then now is 100 years separated from that era. And this is very similar to the passage in 1 Samuel chapter 17, in that scene when David is getting ready to go fight Goliath. And you can see him trying to clunkily put on Saul's armor, whether it's the helmet or the big shield in front of him or the spear. And that's just not him. That's not how he does things. That's not who he is. He may not have the strength to carry the shield at that point in his development. And in some ways, that's sort of analogous to expecting the next generation to wear this ministry model or this way of church or the language that we use around religiosity and spirituality. And so what we're not saying is that the church model and the times in which birthed the church model that we use today is not valuable. And we're not saying that era is old fashioned or anything like that. What we are saying is that there was a particular way of thinking about church in the function of public life in the 1950s that was codified based on the cultural values of those days. And if we look to 2024 or the 21st century, we're very much closer to the future, which is 2050, than we are to the cultural times of 1950. There's so many things that were happening in the 1950s that really not just solidified or codified what the church in America is, but it codified what is American culture and American society. And mind you, this is coming out of a time where we were just coming out of World War II. And there were so many things that were happening on the international scene. America was becoming the superpower in the world. The British Empire had collapsed, and our institutions were rising. We had come out of the Great Depression, and we had figured that out. And part of the reason why it was called the baby boom was because of the large numbers of births that happened in the 1950s. And coming out of the 1950s, because of the GI Bill, so many men in particular were able to go back to college and university and earn their degree. And so you see this fantastic boom in that era. The boom of the suburbs. Redlining created this distinction or the separation between the cities and the suburbs. And so that rise, that growth, that boom in that era also is a part of how we think about like the golden era of religion in America, because at that time, that was when church attendance was at its highest. That's when people most identified as churchgoers or as Christians. And so when we think back to America being a Christian nation, that was, in a sense, the 1950s and the early 1960s. And that sounds glorious to many of us. And it probably was for those who were experiencing that time. What we're just saying is that that was an era that codified the church in America, and the cultural conditions that existed then just doesn't exist in the same way today. And it definitely will not be by the time 2050 comes.
Daniel's referenced David using basically a slingshot to get rid of his foe and to conquer his foe. And that was an innovation that helped him achieve his goals. Similarly, as we talk in upcoming episodes about the shifts we think can help the church see a brighter future, we can look to examples that are out of the ordinary today, like Carl Johnson's Faith City Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, that meets on Sundays for worship, but in the same space has a grocery store that serves people the rest of the week in this neighborhood where residents suffer from food insecurity, which ties into one of the shifts that we have in our book, Becoming a Future Ready Church, and that is going from nuclear families to forged families. There's also Janae and Justin Clapp, whose Imagine Church, based in Arizona, meets online in small groups. They consist of people living across the country who meet together on different days of the week, with hardly anyone gathering at an in-person location. Their story ties into the shift that we speak of from physical only to healthy hybrid. I've reported quite a bit about how congregations fared during and since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Pivot was that watchword, remember, for many at that time. And many of you listening did just that at that time and since then. Maybe not the same way that Imagine Church has come to be, but in some way, you had to make some changes to make your digital presence more compelling. Or maybe your church has become more health conscious and may still serve up that food you usually do at a fellowship hour, but you've added some healthy options, perhaps a choice of fruit, as well as cookies for dessert. So one thing that we think can help people make changes in their congregations is to start with 1 degree of change. Warren, can you explain that principle?
Yeah, that's how every chapter ends, with a discussion, ideally between existing leadership and your rising generation of leaders, the Sauls and the Davids or Esthers or anyone else who is walking with God and representing how the next generation thinks and asking, will this particular piece of armor help you, or do you need to work with your slingshot? And rather than making it a gigantic theoretical framework, we're trying to help everyone, guide everyone with each chapter, with each of the 8 shifts that we identify from this to that, to say, what would be your 1 degree of change? If you could change just one thing that for the long run would make a difference. Kind of like if you got on an airplane and you were going in let's say, Seattle, and we're going to go to Europe. If that flight pattern is just 1 degree off, instead of landing in Madrid, Spain, you may land in the middle of the Sahara Desert. So 1 degree over time makes a big difference. And we want to give you the tools to identify that shift, that very real shift, not a cosmetic shift, but a very real shift that will help prepare your church for the years that are coming as society shifts to, as Wayne Gretzky always said for his hockey playing, I don't go to where the puck is, I go to where the puck is going to be. And we want to help position your churches to be where the culture is, addressing the issues that people are raising and showing how the timeless gospel speaks to, is relevant to, and languages the era that is coming.
Yeah, as you were saying that, Warren, reminds me that becoming a future-ready church is less about getting the future right. It's more about getting the present right. And so much of what the future is going to look like will depend on the things that we're doing today, the things that you're doing today. We wrote the book, Becoming a Future Ready Church, because we really do believe in the church in America. We really do believe in the role that it plays in society and culture making. And we really do believe in church leaders like you and the work that you're called to every single day. And realizing that none of us can tell the future. None of us can tell where culture is going. None of us can tell what church is going to look like by 2050, let alone 100 years from now. But what we really tried to do is to serve you and to give you a sense of optimism based on what we're seeing in research, what we're seeing in trends, but most importantly, what we're seeing in Scripture that applies to us in this cultural moment. We do think that the creators of the future won't be pessimists. They won't be folks who just want to burn the whole thing down. We think those that will create the future are those that actually see the future. They actually believe that there's something more, and they're engaged in Scripture and with the people of God in creating that. And probably one of the last things that we'll share to encourage you to stick in and continue on in this series is that as we look to the rest of the world, now it's important to not like romanticize like the church from around the world, but as we look to the rest of the world and we're learning what's happening in Africa, in Latin America, in parts of Asia, as we see churches in different forms, as we see the growth of churches in from different communities, it's a great reminder that the church at large, the global church, is actually doing really, really well. And the church in America is a part of that. But as we see what's happening around the world in terms of people coming to Christ, in terms of church planting movements, it gives us a little bit of a glimpse as to what would it look like for us to come back to more basic form of understanding how the church can function, and giving the chance to the next generation to have more of a landscape and more of a canvas, that is, more of a canvas for them to create, and to give them the hope and to give them the excitement and the passion to create on the canvas. And so that's really what we're hoping that Becoming a Future Ready Church can do for you as you're navigating through these 8 shifts, and as you're reading through it, and as you're watching this video and the subsequent videos coming out of this, that it'll give you an imagination to have a conversation with the next generation leader, or if you're a young leader, to have a conversation with those that are currently leading, to think about what is the canvas before us and how can we actually create this together. And we really hope that that's what this book will inspire you to do. So thanks again for joining us for this episode on Exponential's next series on Becoming a Future Ready Church. We hope that you'll check out the other episodes that you can find at Exponential's YouTube. Just scroll down to the Exponential Next section.
Take care, everyone.
And we look forward to talking next about very specific shifts, moving from this to that and giving you examples. Come see us. Thanks.